Yes, welcome to the webinar. We'll be doing questions after the webinar. GoToWebinar doesn't really work that well interactively, so please make sure to note your questions down, and you can ask them when we get to the Q&A section. So the topic for today is basically A/B testing with Varnish Cache, and sort of a bit step-by-step guide on sort of how you can deploy A/B testing in Varnish, and also how you can use VCS to sort of get some data out of your A/B tests. So a quick introduction: the company we're working for, Varnish Software. So we're sort of the company behind Varnish Cache. We've been there from since the start. Our sort of business model is that we offer subscriptions where you can get software that works with Varnish, 24/7 support, and professional services. So we help organizations that sort of need help to sort of deploy Varnish in some way or another, or provide tools to them. Varnish Cache, quick introduction. I guess most of you are pretty well familiar with Varnish Cache, but yeah, it's a web app accelerator. It's fast, it's flexible, and it sort of uses VCL to describe policies for transactions. That's basically sort of the last point there. That's sort of the crux of Varnish Cache, and that's where sort of most of the power of Varnish derives from, is that VCL language. So this is sort of the essential sort of core of Varnish Cache. We have these various states, and the requests flow through these states. And at each of these states, you can sort of write VCL logic to sort of to implement your sort of how your business logic of your website. And that's what we're going to use to do A/B testing. So also introduction to VCS. So VCS is the software that Dag here wrote. So it's a special purpose in-memory time series database. So it's actually built especially to sort of collect data from Varnish. It leverages VCL for power, so you can sort of write logic in VCL to sort of instruct VCS in order to how it should sort of gather data, and can be used to track more or less anything that happens in Varnish. So this is basically the VCS architecture, how it works. So we have Varnish Cache installations, maybe a cluster of 3 servers here. Another sort of essential part of Varnish Cache is the shared memory log, where Varnish sort of logs everything that happens. VCS is connected to Varnish Cache through the shared memory log by having a probe that's basically listens to what happens in the shared memory log. Whenever there's events that are happening in the shared memory log that VCS needs to know about, messages are pushed over 0MQ to have central VCS installations. Okay, this is what VCS looks like when you sort of invoke it. You typically invoke it in VCL deliver, or yeah, depending on what you're going to do. So here I check if the content type begins with text /. If it is, so then it's obviously text HTML or text plain or whatever. Then we need to log that. And we use just std log to just write to the shared memory log. So the first keyword here is VCS key, which basically just tells the probe that this log line is something you should pay attention to. The next part is basically we're creating a namespace inside VCS. So VCS is this special database that builds time series. In this database, you have basically a key for each time series. And since VCS has a flat namespace, we usually just do strings in order to sort of shard that namespace into different pieces. So here we just prefix every key with URL / colon in order to get stats on each specific URL, which is this part. So this basically will tell VCS that here's a transaction that you need to pay attention to, and use the URL colon and then the URL as the key. So on to the sort of main topic for today, A/B testing. I mean, A/B testing, most of you probably know very well what A/B testing is about, but this is sort of my understanding what A/B testing is. It's basically to perform experiments on the website. You do this by sort of splitting users into groups. You have typically have the A group, the control group, which is the business as usual group, and the B group, which is the experiment. And you sort of make these go head to head. You serve different content. You serve one type of content to the A group, one type of content to the B group. You measure the result, see if there's any sort of difference in how the sort of users respond to that content, and then you find a winner. So let's try to do this in Varnish. So the first part is basically try to sort of set up the A/B test in Varnish. So obviously the first thing we need to do is to assign a user to a group. So a random user comes in on a landing page. We need to figure out if this user belongs in group A or group B. So there's some very simple VCL here. A couple of things to note. The first things we do is to unset rec HTTP AB group. What we do here is use the request object in Varnish as sort of a place to store state for this request. That's a pretty normal thing to do. So the first things we actually do in the beginning is to unset it, so we know for sure that the user isn't providing us with any garbage data. Then we basically check if rec URL equals /foo. That's the landing page we want to conduct the experiment on. If you want to conduct the experiment on the whole site or every site that's behind that Varnish, you just remove that line. Then the next thing is basically invoke std.random, which gives us a random number between 0 and 99 in this case. Check if it's below 50. Then it's the A group, and we set rec HTTP AB group to A. If it's not below 50, then that user belongs in group B, and so we set this on this this transaction. Now, of course, setting rec HTTP AB group doesn't really sort of do anything. It's not persistent in any way. So the next, and since HTTP is stateless, the next request that comes along will actually then be assigned to another group on random, unless we actually do something about it. So the typical thing to do would be to store this in a cookie. We do that in VCL deliver. So as the sort of object flows out of Varnish, we basically modify it a bit, add a custom HTTP header to the response. So here we do basically set the resp HTTP set cookie, and then the cookie is named AB group. That's not very original, but and then AB group equals, and then we pull in data from rec HTTP AB group. So AB group equals either A or B. And then we add expires, and we use cookie.format, the underscore RFC 1123, which basically is the cookie vmod, which is a Varnish module that sort of makes cookie handling a bit easier. We'll rely heavily on that throughout the presentation. You could do without it, but then you have to use regular expressions, and it becomes really, really ugly. So we set an expire setter that expires, so this cookie will expire in 60 minutes. Yeah, and it's a HTTP only cookie. So now we've set the cookie. We assign the user to a AAB group, and we set that in a cookie. The next things to do is actually make that sort of group stick, because next time the sort of user comes back in a couple of seconds later, we need to recognize that the user belongs to A or B if he has that cookie. So again, quite simple VCL. We check if the URL is /foo, and then again, this is the cookie vmod here. If cookie get AB group. So for those of you who've done cookie manipulations in VCL earlier, you'll see that this is quite a huge improvements on how to compared to using regular expressions. So what we do here on the third line is basically set a rec HTTP AB group to the cookie AB group. So, and if there's no such thing as a cookie AB group, then we sort of can assume that this is a new user and we assign it to a group, and then we just sort of repeat the same VCL that we saw earlier. So this basically just sort of extends that VCL a bit. And you, of course, you still need to sort of repersist the cookie if that's what you want. Next topic would be to sort of so Varnish, at this point, Varnish sort of takes a user, assigns it to the A and B group, and sort of persists that. So we're more or less actually halfway there in doing A/B testing. Next step would be to actually serve the content and to make sure that Varnish actually understands that the A content belongs to the A group and B content belongs to the B group. Yeah, and that's what we're going to do now. So there are basically three ways of doing this. You can use a custom request header and then HTTP vary to sort of connect these two things. You can do different backends. So different backend for A group and different backend for B group. Or you can use URL rewriting. So change the URL. So I'll go through all of these. The first way of doing it, which is the way I would prefer to have this implemented, is to use a custom request header and vary. So basically, we just set a request header in VCL, and then we have already done that actually. So this would be the AB group HTTP header that we set rec http.ab group. And when Varnish sort of hits the backend, it will actually pass that header along. So the backend will know if it is an A or a B group user. So the backend then needs to respond with the sort of correct content for an A and B group. So you need to modify the backend so it actually takes the AB group header into account. That's pretty obvious. And it also needs to do one more thing, and that responds with a vary AB group. So HTTP vary is my favorite HTTP header. What it actually does, so this is a HTTP response header. So it's something that the backend attaches to the object, to its response as it sort of flows into Varnish. What it does is that it tells Varnish that this URL, there's several variants of it, and you should serve the variant, connect the variant to the request header, which is mentioned here. So the backend basically tells Varnish that if a client comes along and he has a AB group header, you should serve content that matches that header. So of course, the client doesn't have the AB group header when it comes in, but it's assigned in VCL receive, which is more or less the same thing. And then Varnish will magically serve the right content. So HTTP vary is a bit of a tricky header to sort of get your mind around if you sort of haven't heard about it before. Spend a couple of minutes sort of researching it. It's definitely worth it. I mean, the tricky part of HTTP vary is that it's a response header that talks about variants of depending on request headers, which is kind of different. Yes, next option would be to use different backends. So this is excellent if you're running a highly virtualized environment. Might be sort of easier for you to just sort of spin off a new instance on Amazon or something and then sort of play around with the application there instead of changing the actual application. Basically, you just set the backend in VCL, and then that backends become sticky. So this is the VCL. Here I did so I just added this to basically the bottom of the VCL receive. So we set if rec HTTP AB group is set to A, then we set the backend to alpha, and we do a pass, or we set it to beta, and then we do a pass. The reason I'm doing a pass here is basically disabling caching on the A and B group here. That's not actually necessary, but Varnish needs to understand that the A and B groups are different, and that the header AB group should influence what content should be delivered. So instead of actually disabling caching, a much better solution would be to either use Vary again, because you can use Vary as well with different backends, or you could actually also, if you want to, you could influence how Varnish stores object in memory, and then add maybe the AB group to the internal hash that Varnish uses to organize the content. Those are sort of Vary I've already done, so I thought that I'd try to do it differently in this example. And hashing, changing the hashing is actually sort of an advanced topic that we don't really want to get into here. So next option would be URL rewriting. So this is basically we change the URL based on the A and B group. Yeah, and the backend sort of needs to respond to that. So it needs to read out what group it is from the URL. So again, this is quite a simple way of doing it. Just rec URL equals rec URL, and then another question mark to indicate a query string, and then set the option group equals A or B. If you do it like that, there's no reason to mess around with Vary at all, because Varnish will know perfectly well that something / foo question mark group equals A is different from group equals B. So we're sort of halfway here actually at this point. So just to sort of sum up what we've done so far. So at this point, we actually have like A/B testing implemented in Varnish. We have we have an A group and we have a B group, and we've done this. I think it's fairly trivial, all in all, to get this up and running. So basically, the sort of next part of the presentation is sort of now what, how to sort of measure the sort of impact that this has on the website and how the users behave. So we need to sort of track these experiments. So the first things you sort of need to do is find and log events in VCL. Now we can sort of all need to sort of decide what an event is. That's really an arbitrary term here. But the idea is that something of some significant happens on your website. So for instance, the user loading / foo, that's potentially significant. You want to track how many times that happens, or the number of page views or something. And you need to indicate what group that actually that event belongs to. So with VCS installed, then basically this comes down to putting one line in, which is std log and then VCS key. And again, since it's a flat namespace, we basically create the sub namespace abtx and then the A and B group. So this will give us TXs for transaction. So this will make Varnish VCS actually count the number of transactions in the A group and the number of transactions in the B group, and give nice time series on each one of these. You could actually also add the URL after AB group. Then you get if you have multiple types of events, then you'll be able to sort of break down the different events into to distinguish the different events from each other. And still be able to sum up how many transactions in the A group and how many transactions in the B group. So Next thing we probably want to do is somehow tracking of unique IDs. So the first thing there is to actually find a unique ID for each user. I think like the simplest thing to do, those of you who use Google Analytics, is just to use the __ UTMA cookie that Google Analytics provides. Usually in Varnish we just discard it, but actually here it actually makes sense to sort of keep it around and use it to identify a user. Of course, you could basically also add another random string and then sort of persist that in a cookie. But since Google Analytics already does that for us, we might just as well reuse that one. Or you'll probably find another cookie as well on your website, that a session cookie or something, which can be reused for this. So in order to sort of get the unique string, the only VCL code that's needed is basically cookie.get and the name of the cookie, and you have a unique string. Then you sort of push that ID to VCS along with the other stuff you're pushing to VCS, which is basically std.log and then VCS unique ID and then the actual unique ID. So this will sort of add data to VCS. So for a specific time series, that, for instance, the number of transactions in one group. So you count, maybe you have 19,000 transactions in group A, 19,000 events, and then VCS will sort of track for how many different unique IDs those events have been generated. So 19,000 events originating from maybe 6,000 unique users. Yeah, VCS will handle those things. That gives you an interesting metric on sort of number of users in each group, and you can see if STD random actually does a good job of providing you the proper random number. Final piece of the puzzle is basically tracking conversion. So conversion is basically what you actually want to measure. So every sort of website has a goal or a sub goal of some sort. So it can be different things, but basically that what you're trying to influence is how these conversions are happening. So yeah, good examples of conversions. You need to identify them in VCL in order to sort of track them in VCS. But these can be sort of form submissions. I think that's the most common one. So you end up on a landing page. It asks you to sign up for a webinar or something. You fill out the form or you don't, depending on sort of the picture of the guy giving the talk or something. I don't know. Or yeah, download something or click on something or share something to a social network, or all these things. I mean, these things flow through Varnish. All these events that happens on your website. So if it I mean, for social activity, you usually look at the referrer headers of the sort of traffic coming in. So if something is shared on Facebook and somebody clicks on that, you can tell by the referrer header that actually they're coming off Facebook. So when you know where they're going, so you sort of, that can be a sort of successful social conversion. And when you have these things, you basically just stick them into VCS. For this example, I use posting to a forum. So remember the landing page we've been discussing is /foo. So if rec_url is /foo/form, which is the method that accepts the form, and rec method is post. So there's a syntax error there. Yeah, missing quotes on post. Damn it. If that's the case, then that's a successful conversion. So basically what we do there is just log that to std log, VCS key, use abconv to basically indicate that this is successful conversion, and then sort of pass along rec http ab group to indicate that it's conversion in the A group or the B group, and maybe then just for fun. I just threw with the rec URL here as well. So for instance, in case you have multiple successful conversion forms, you might want to sort of add that to VCS as well, because then you have 3 different ways of actually converting a user. You want to sort of break down statistics on which way the actual user was converted. End results. A/B execution, testing execution is now sort of all done in Varnish. It's speed and caching friendly, sort of. You can retain your cache hit rates. Yeah, and all done in Varnish, so there's no JavaScript libraries that need to be loaded, that needs to sort of mess with the DOM here. Yeah. The only thing sort of you need to change to your setup is the backend must somehow provide content. Yeah. In this time, we used VCS to provide statistics on how the sort of experiments are going. So the statistics we concentrated on are the number of transactions in each group, number of unique users in each group. That gives you sort of interesting metrics as well in itself. So, for instance, A group had 5,000 transactions and 1,000 users. The B group had 6,000 transactions and 800 users. So the sort of the discrepancy in transactions per users actually tells you something about how the behavior of the web users are changing. Yeah, and then of course number of successful conversions, which is the sort of the main number that we usually focus on. Yeah, VCS provides this in real time, basically. So Dag, I think you might want to talk us through this.
Okay, so I was thinking maybe we should take a look at the code, because I guess Per has presented us with various snippets. So I spent some time today and hacked together sort of a quick working demo for this. So maybe we should take a look at how it looks sort of all together in a working example. So sorry, Per, can you help me a bit find the?
Oh, this is the. This is not.
Okay.
No, this is. Oops. This.
Yeah. Okay. There it is.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So oops. I'll open up my Varnish default VCL file where I've put all the configuration. So I can start going through this from the top. So as Per has already told you, of course, we're using the cookie vmod and the std vmod, standard vmod. And of course, I have the simple backend definition pointing at my Apache server. So here in VCL receive, first we verify that there wasn't already an AB group header set by the client, so just unset that. And then we initialize the cookie vmod by parsing the cookie string. So this will parse the cookie string and set up various states within the cookie vmod, so you can easily get and set cookies in there. So then we test the rec URL to see if it's the page in question, the resource in question. And then we set the AB group request header to make it visible for further handling in Varnish. So if there was a cookie, we just use that. And if there wasn't, we select one, just sampling one using the std random functionality as Per laid out earlier. Yeah, so it's fairly straightforward. So, of course, VCL receive is the code that runs right after Varnish has received the request. And then we move on to VCL fetch. So this is not actually strictly necessary. VCL fetch is after Varnish has passed the request to the backend and you get a response back. So you get to look at the response headers and you get to change them before Varnish does any decisions as to whether it should actually cache this response. So here I have added the vary header and pointed it at my AB group request header for this specific resource. Now you can also indicate this in the actual backend, but yeah, either way does the job.
Yeah, I mean we're Varnish people.
I'm actually pretty sure I also indicate this in the backend.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, so well, yeah.
Good job.
doing it twice. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. So here in deliver. So if we have an AB group set and the URL is foo.php, so right now it occurs to me that this should actually always be the case. We should always have an AB group set in case that the URL is /foo.php. But regardless, then we make sure we set the setCookie header to set the AB group cookie to contain the A or the B, as we talked about, which were two groups we're testing. And then if this was a get for this resource to track the number of impressions for our test with the A and B groups, we simply tag this transaction, this request, with a VCS key prefixed with AB group, along with the A or the B, which is whatever letter is in the AB group string there. And of course, for tracking conversions, we do pretty much the same thing, but we only do that for yeah, I see I went a bit fast writing this code. This is also superfluous, checking for foo PHP here.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, anyway, so in the case of a post, this means we've had a conversion. So then we do, as Per said in this example, we track that setting, the prefixing with abconv. And of course, this is the thing I just added that I didn't think of earlier, because for the downstream clients, they have no idea about the AB group request header, because that's added in Varnish. So if you pass very AB group to them, they will have no idea what that is. But we do in fact vary on cookie. So I added the cookie request header to the vary string, or rather just set it like that. So yeah, here we have a very simple PHP application that will serve different pictures of actually two very cute animals, depending on whether it was an A or a B or the B group. So in this case, we got the cat, and we can, if we are so inclined that we fill out this form, we will have a successful conversion. So that was a post. Now, I also have the Varnish custom statistics server running on this. It listens on port 6555. So we query that using the all, I guess. This will list out all of the keys in there. So here we see the key names. So we have abconv A, abconv B, which is the number of conversions for A and B. And then we have AB groups A and B, which is the total number of requests served for groups A and B. So we can look at the top listing, which is basically an easy way to show us the number of hits for those. So here we see, so this is currently set up to track the last 30 seconds in a single window. So the top list will only display values from the last window. By default, we can also actually aggregate across windows by specifying something like this. This will collapse together the last four windows. So here we can see that over the last 2 minutes, we had 3 requests served for the group B, out of which we had 2 successful conversions. And we have 1 request served for the group A, out of which there were no successful conversions. Yeah. So we see
group
that
B1.
Yes. Well, I guess with a single request, it's I'm not sure that is statistically significant, but we're not that we've decided that's not quite within the scope of today's talk.
No, it's not.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. So. Yeah, I think there'll be some slides. Probably Hildur will send out some slides or something. I think she'll do that. Right?
Okay.
Okay, guys.
Good.
Thank you very much
for listening.
Cheers.
Cheers.